tonight.
Whilst you're watching Craig lose weight on telly, I want to show you how Coulson has done it.
Southwest and some low cloud coming in from the North Sea. I'll have all the details in about 10 minutes.
Good morning, welcome to Breakfast with Dan Walker and Sally Nugent.
In the real world.
We'll speak to Corrie star Coulson Smith about how a storyline on the soap led him to become healthier and happier in real life. Good morning, it's Wednesday, it's the 2nd of June and an extra £1.4 billion for funding has been announced by the government to help pupils in England whose education has been disrupted during the pandemic.
Boris Johnson said the aim was to make sure no child was left behind. But teaching unions have described the offer as hugely disappointing. Our education correspondent Elaine Dunkley has this report.
This is our reception children here, there's all sorts going on.
This is Ash Green Community Primary in Halifax.
How are we doing?
Some of the children have missed nearly a year of in-school learning.
It's for you at 7 o'clock this morning. More than £1 billion for catch-up tuition for pupils in England, but head teachers say it's a fraction of what's needed.
Did we actually give the best for these children? Well, we did the best that we could do with the means that we had, but the means we had weren't enough.
Since children started returning to the classroom, his caseload has doubled.
Children are coming in and they're disclosing arguments, fights, parents, carers, physically abusing them, emotionally abusing them.
We did the best that we could do with the means that we had, but the means we had weren't enough.
I'm going to say 51. What would 51 divided by 100 be?
Catching up won't be quick or easy. For schools like this one, at the heart of a community, there is a long road to recovery. Elaine Dunkley, BBC News in Halifax.
It's a big issue, isn't it? And we'll be speaking to the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, in about 25 minutes, live on the programme.
Well, let's talk now to our chief political correspondent, Adam Fleming, who joins us from Westminster. Morning to you, Adam. How has this funding announcement gone down?
Well, the teaching unions are quite disappointed by it because they'd been led to believe that it would be much, much more money available, maybe even 10 times as much as this, in conversations they've been having with Kevin Collins, who is the official who's been appointed as the catch-up supremo advising the government on all of this. Where I think they will be slightly more impressed, though, is that the tweaks to the national tutoring programme. Up until now, you basically had to get a tutor from a private company and the government gave schools vouchers to spend privately. That's now being changed a little bit, so there will be money available for schools to hire local tutors or to pay extra money to teachers or teaching assistants to do that tutoring. So I think they'll be pleased about that. But where I think there might be a bit of a row brewing is this idea of extending the school day. There had been plans to do a big pilot programme where schools would sit for an extra 2 hours a day so that pupils could do extracurricular activities after lessons. That has now been turned into a review which will look at the concept of the school day over the next few months. And I think that just shows you there are some teaching unions that are in favour of that, some that are opposed, some government ministers who are in favour of that, some that are opposed. And I think those arguments will be made over the next few months.
Away from education, Adam, yes.
Also have some sunshine as well. Play starts from 11, so that's good news, isn't it?
Unbelievable, isn't it,
Not
Jane?
like.
Thanks very much indeed. Now, an extra £1.4 billion has been announced by the government to help children in England catch up on learning they've missed during the pandemic.
But that plan has been described as hugely disappointing and a damp squib by teachers' unions who say it doesn't go far enough. Let's put some of those points to the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, who joins us live on the programme. Good morning. Thank you very much for being with us. So here to talk about that £1.4 billion. We mentioned that damp squib quote. That came from the General Secretary of the School Leaders Union. You've also got the General Secretary of the Association of School and College Leaders saying you've let down the nation's children with this money. The Prime Minister has called education a priority. Are you trying to do it on the cheap?
Well, we're certainly not. Just over the last 12 months, we've seen a commitment to invest £1.7 billion extra to help children. What we're announcing today is an extra £1.4 billion. There's been many parents who've known for so long that one way to really help their children is by getting them and paying for extra tutoring. And as part of a £1.7 billion that we'd announced over the last few months, we'd started to expand the amount of tutoring that some. And as part of a £1.7 billion that we'd announced over the last few months, we'd started to expand the amount of tutoring that some of the children who've been most disadvantaged have been able to access. But what we're doing is we're expanding that to up to 6 million children, creating an extra 100 million hours of tutoring time for children. Because, you know, as those who've been able to afford to pay for it in the past have known, it really works. And that's why we're having such a enormous expansion, a sort of tutoring revolution to drive this forward, because it delivers for children.
You talk about that tutoring. There, you know, your own figures say there are 6 million pupils who are in need of a catch-up, but there's only the signing up for those tutoring programmes is only 250,000. What about the rest?
So this is why we've announced the extra money today, because we want to expand that. So we're up from the 250,000 that we've been running this programme with already, but actually expand it to so many more children. Because, you know, when you go into schools, and I had the benefit, obviously, of visiting schools regularly and talking to children who are actually doing this tutoring programme, you can hear from their own voices about how it's helping them catch up. They maybe don't have as much confidence in terms of doing their maths or English, but by being in a small group, by getting that extra help, it gives them the confidence to be able to really excel. But we don't just want that for 250,000. We want it for millions of our children up and down the land. And that's why we're doing this massive expansion, because it will deliver. It will have an impact. It'll help children, it'll help parents, and it will help the schools themselves.
You say it's a massive plan, but we know that plans costing almost 10 times as much, more than £10 billion, were being considered until last week. I don't want to oversimplify things, but how did that process work? Did you go to Rishi Sunak and say, this is what we want, and he said, you can't have all that money?
So what we're doing is not just in terms of the tutoring, but we're also expanding for teacher quality.
Yeah, I'm just, Mr. Williamson, the question.
I was just coming back to that.
I know, but the question was about the plan of last week. I mean, your own Education Recovery Commissioner, Sir Gavin said that this would take billions of pounds. He wanted 10 times more than what is being given by the government to try and aid this catch-up in education. Why is it so much smaller than he recommended?
So what we're looking at are the interventions that we can actually deliver today, make sure that we're able to get the money on the table out to schools in order to support them, in order to be able to help our children while they're in school straight away. We're actually doing some more work on this and looking in detail as to how we can look at the time element as to how we can help children. I think there's a very legitimate question that we have to ask as to sometimes we see in some schools children leaving the school gates at 2:45. Is that too early? And it's not just about academic attainment, it's also about enrichment as well. Are they getting enough support in the whole school day, not just in terms of learning English and maths, but much more broadly as well? So that's why we're doing extra work on that as we look towards the comprehensive spending review. But quite simply, I didn't, and I don't think the Prime Minister or the Chancellor did either, wanted to be in a situation where we were waiting for a comprehensive spending review to get money out of the door in order to be able to having a positive impact in terms of children's lives. And that's why we've done this quite unprecedented intervention outside of a spending period, where we're actually getting an extra £1.4 billion out in order to drive this tutoring programme and teacher quality programme forward.
I should viewers at home, there is a bit of a rattle on your microphone, Mr. Williamson. You don't need to adjust your TV set. We'll try and sort it out. We can still hear you, thankfully. Just to go back to you on Sir Gavin, who's this, as I said, the Education Recovery Commissioner, the catch-up Tzar, as it's been coined. You say about this unprecedented amount of money, but this is a man who was put in the role to tell you how much it would cost to try and sort out the education system. Haven't you undermined him by not giving anywhere near the amount of money that he said that was needed to do this catch-up process?
Well, what we're doing is we're delivering on additional money for our schools, but most importantly for
Mr.
our
Williamson,
children.
sorry, the question was, haven't you undermined him by not listening to his recommendations?
No, because what we're doing is we're working incredibly closely with Sir Kevin, making sure that the interventions, as he suggested, over tutoring, as well as over teacher quality, these are implemented immediately. But what we're also doing is we're doing a process and a review as to how best, as we look forward to the comprehensive spending review, as to how best and where is the best evidence in order to be able to deliver time elements as well. So these are the areas that we're currently looking at, and I think it's the right approach to do. We need to be asking questions as to the structure of a school day, how it's best delivered, and that's what we're doing. But we don't want to wait, and we don't want to pause for a comprehensive spending review. We want to be able to be getting on with things today.
Okay.
We want to be expanding the tutoring programme. We want the 6 million children to be able to benefit from it, and we want to be able to see the results of driving up teacher quality immediately. These are things that impact on children, they impact on parents and family life as well. That's why it's absolutely vital. We don't pause, we don't wait, we get on with it.
And in terms of impact on family life and impact on pupils and teachers, the issue of extending the school day, there was meant to be, wasn't there, a sort of a 2-hour pilot scheme, which now seems to have blended into a review. You're the Education Secretary. What is your view on the length of the school day?
Well, I think there's a real benefit, and you see some of the highest performing schools across the country that have the ability to offer enrichment activities and other activities and a slightly longer day for children, and it does seem to deliver considerable benefits. So it's right and proper that we look at that and how best to do it.
So
and
are you pushing for a longer school day?
I think there's real benefits to looking at how we can expand the school day. I think it delivers real benefits for
Mr. Williamson.
For children.
Sorry, I'm really sorry
I'm always
I'm
very
really sorry to
enthusiastic
push
for a longer school day.
I'm trying not to interrupt you, but I'm asking you a direct question. You're in charge of education. And I think there are millions of parents who'll be watching you this morning thinking, what does the Education Secretary think about this huge issue of making the school day longer? So are you, as Education Secretary, in favour of a longer school day?
Well, as I said, there's many schools that actually deliver a longer school day and children see the benefit from it. So I think there's a real strong case for doing it, and that's why I have been and will continue to remain enthusiastic at looking at all the different ways of how we expand the way children are able to be in school, not just in terms of the academic, but also in terms of the enrichment as well. And that for me is important. I see the benefits directly, and I think it's really important that we do the work to make the case to see how we can do that. And there's already many schools right across the country that deliver an expanded school day. But up until this point, we've not actually pushed it as hard as maybe we should have done. And if you look at our school days, and I accept that for my case this is going back many years, but actually it's areas such as the school lunch. In my day it used to be an hour long, and actually you're able to do sports and other activities during that time. And often in many schools that's been condensed down to half an hour. And I'm not sure if that always delivers the very best for pupils. So it's really important that we do a full review on this. We look at the different options that there are as to how feasible it is to deliver it, and that's what we're doing.
That sounded like quite a long yes. You are in favour of a longer school day.
Well, yeah, I've always been enthusiastic about seeing how we can expand it, so very much so.
OK, we nearly got a yes out of you to a direct answer, a direct question. On another sort of a related issue to what we're talking about, one of the other things that Sir Kevin Collins, the Education Recovery Commissioner, was saying was that a quote from him, teachers should not be asked to do more for no more. What about the issue of teachers' pay?
Well, we saw in the last financial year, we saw the teachers getting the largest pay rise of any public sector workers. This coming financial year, as you'll be aware, that there is a public sector pay freeze that's going to be impacting on all public sector workers, but that's the we obviously have to adhere to that as we deal with some of the big financial challenges, but we'll obviously look at how we take that forward. But as part of what we're doing in terms of the tutoring element, we are giving schools the ability to be able to pay teachers extra to do the additional tutoring work over and above their responsibilities, and making sure that schools have that flexibility to be able to either bring in staff or to pay existing staff extra to do extra work.
Okay, and something I suppose which is very much connected to all this and the money in education is the whole prospect of what will happen on the 21st of June and those lockdown restrictions. Because as we are seeing the age range of those people who are being hospitalised or those people who are sort of catching COVID-19 is coming down quite a bit. Do you think that will impact on education in a far bigger way than we saw during the first series of lockdowns and the first and the second wave, because of the age range of those who are now being affected by it? And in actual fact, rather than impacting on the NHS, it will have a much bigger impact on education.
So what we will see is, with more people being vaccinated, and as always, the right thing to do is encourage people to get their first vaccine and get their second vaccine as soon as they're able to do so. But by doing this, we're reducing transmission through wider society, and we're squeezing COVID out, and that's important. But it is vital that we continue to adhere to the restrictions that are currently in place. And we've seen schools open fully since the 8th of March, and actually schools, by taking the measures they have, whether it's the testing regimes, whether it's the other systems of control that we've got into schools, we've actually kept transmission low, and we've kept schools to be a safe place. And I would certainly be hoping that that doesn't change as we move forward.
Mr. Williamson, appreciate your time this morning. Thank you very much for talking to us on Breakfast. It was a bit windy there, wasn't it?
It was a little bit windy. What was going on there, I wonder?
I don't entirely know, but
windy
hopefully
inside.
you're able to hear what the Education Secretary was saying.
I think you got a yes.
Nearly a yes.
Long, complicated, nuanced.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's been a bit windy for Carol as well.
£1 billion is being made available to provide tutoring for the most disadvantaged pupils in England to catch up on missed schoolwork. But unions have described the plan as hugely disappointing. Led by Alan Smith.
Another £1.4 billion is being made available by the government to help pupils in England catch up with schoolwork missed because of lockdown closures. Most of the money will pay for tutoring for disadvantaged pupils, with the rest used for teacher training. Unions have described the settlement as inadequate and incomplete because it's less than a tenth of the original plan. Whitehall sources say the Treasury will continue to work with officials on what's needed. Here's our education editor, Branwen Jeffries.
But people close to the discussions in government have told me that plans costing almost 10 times as much, more than £10 billion, were being considered until last week. Those plans would have included funding extra hours for learning or activities such as sport or supporting well-being. These were, according to our sources, blocked by a Treasury reluctant to commit to such a big upfront cost. Schools will now have to wait until the review of government spending in the autumn, but many will be disappointed by the lack of a long-term education plan now.
The NHS in England is...
Thanks, Alan. It's 28 minutes to 7. You may be counting the days. It's 20, no less, than until the planned opening up day for England on June the 21st. And there's lots of pressure on the Prime Minister to stick to that, especially after yesterday's figures on zero COVID tests. But the easing of lockdown has been delayed in Scotland. Adam Fleming's our chief political correspondent. Morning, Adam.
Morning.
And just give us a sense of what the thinking is in Downing Street about the June 21st date.
Well, zero COVID deaths within 28 days of a negative test recorded, which feels like a big positive milestone, although there are some caveats to that. Which side of that argument Boris Johnson ends up in 2 weeks, we'll find out.
And then there's Nicola Sturgeon's decision, isn't she? That
will give us another little clue about whether the government is feeling confident and safe about the state of the world or super, super cautious.
And finally,
other than the much more buttoned up Keir Starmer you might see in a speech via Microsoft Teams or Zoom or in Prime Minister's questions. But as we all know, leading the opposition is about so much more than just getting through one particularly tough, particularly moving interview.
Adam, thank you.
Meeting outside Pret in Westminster. That's a glimpse into Adam's life. It's 24 minutes to 7 now. Free extra tuition for disadvantaged pupils and extra help for teenagers struggling with English and maths. That's the announcement coming from the government today. But the plan for English schools is being criticised for its lack of ambition. Our education correspondent is Elaine Dunkley. Let's begin, Elaine, with what has been announced.
Yes, so this morning an announcement of £1.4 billion from the government. And when you break it down, there's £1 billion to support up to 6 million 15-hour tutoring courses for disadvantaged school children, as well as an expansion of the 16 to 19 tuition fund targeting key subjects such as maths and English. £400 million will help give early year practitioners and 500,000 school teachers across the country training and support. And schools and colleges will be funded to give some Year 13 students the option to repeat their final year. And this builds on the £1.7 billion already announced to help children catch up on what they've missed during the pandemic, which includes summer schools and mental health support, bringing the total investment to over £3 billion. The £1.7 billion already announced to help children catch up on what they've missed during the pandemic, which includes summer schools and mental health support, bringing the total investment to over £3 billion. Now, it's understood that the government wanted to announce £10 billion, but when they tried to process that, the Treasury declined and said there were insufficient funds. And so the £10 billion, which some people were expecting, wasn't announced. Now, there is a substantial amount of catching up needed in schools, and understanding the scale of the task is crucial. So according to research by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, most children across the UK have missed over half a year of normal in-person schooling. That's likely to be more than 5% of their entire time in school. And during lockdown, we saw that pupils from more disadvantaged backgrounds often lacked the digital equipment, so laptops and iPads, and also the space to participate in effective remote learning, and fell further behind.
But crucially, it is not just the trade unions who are criticising this for its lack of ambition. You might expect that. Ministers might dismiss it. But the man who was appointed by ministers to be Education Recovery Commissioner has said in his quote in the press release, more will be needed.
Yes, that's right. So Gavin Collins is still considering a long-term proposal to address the impact of COVID on children. He suggested a much more ambitious plan back in February. Today, he said the investment that's been announced in teaching and tutoring offers support to a significant number of children and teachers, but more will be needed to meet the scale of the challenge. It's not certain when or whether the government will announce more funding, but the next stage of the recovery plan will include looking at time spent in schools and colleges, so possibly proposals for longer school days. The government says the findings will be set out later in the year and will depend on the next spending review.
Elaine Dunkley, thank you. We'll be hearing from Labour's spokesman and from the Education Secretary later in the programme.
Thank you. Time now 19 minutes past 7. Did you read more books during lockdown? It seems lots of us did.
Thanks, Dom. It's 23 minutes past 7. The government's announced a package of help for schools in England to pay for extra tuition to help children and young people catch up after a year of disruption in schools. The amount involved, about £1 billion, is much less than is needed, according to not just Labour and the teaching unions, but according to leaked documents from the man appointed by the government to advise on what is needed to catch up. Our education correspondent, Elaine Dunkley, has been talking to one primary school in Halifax about what catch-up would mean for them. Thank you, Alan. It's coming up to 8:10. Children who can't hold a pencil. Children who can't sit still and pay attention. Children who can't read and write. When Boris Johnson promised that no child would be left behind as a result of the learning lost during the pandemic, those are just some of the challenges teachers are now facing.
Yeah, it's my handwriting because I hadn't done that much since lockdown, and it's gone a bit different since. I've been at home for such a long time.
And when you came back to school, I bet you were a bit tired, weren't you, doing all these activities?
Yeah.
Tell me what that was like.
As soon as I went home, I was pretty much asleep.
Those were the voices of children from Ash Green Community Primary School in Halifax, talking to our correspondent Elaine Dunkley. This morning, the government has unveiled a package of free tuition for disadvantaged pupils, extra help for teenagers struggling with their English and maths, more money for teacher training too. But can it make up for the loss for the average pupil of half a year's face-to-face teaching time? The man in charge is the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, who joins us from our Westminster studio this morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nick.
How many children, how many young people are you hoping that this package you're unveiling will now help?
We're hoping this will benefit up to 6 million children, a direct intervention. And we've been looking very closely at the evidence as to how best to help children when they've been missing out. One of the best interventions seems to be the small group tuition. We've been rolling this out in terms of other packages that we announced, £1.7 billion that we've announced over the last 12 months. But the evidence seems to be pointing this is the single thing that can make the biggest single change for children. And it's something that actually, a lot of people have seen themselves with their own children if they've been in a good enough position to be able to pay for tuition for their children, because they can see the amount of progress that their kids can benefit from for having that real focused attention. But we don't want this just to be the preserve of a few. We want to expand it much more greatly. And that's
there's the rub, though, isn't it? You say 6 million courses, up to 6 million children. The truth is, for the really disadvantaged, one course is not going to be nearly enough. So this is going to have to be focused, isn't it, on those who are most disadvantaged. There are 7.5 million pupils in English schools, so it won't help all, will it?
So the evidence goes to show, and we've been looking very closely as to how this rollout has been happening in schools already. But the evidence is showing where children have lost up to 2 months worth of time, and they're sort of 2 months behind. Actually, this programme of targeted intervention around English and maths actually can help children catch up between 3 to 5 months of lost learning. So the evidence goes to show it does actually deliver. But this is only part of a process. As I've touched upon, over the last 12 months, we've announced 2 previous packages. And as we look forward to the spending review, there's a real sense about how we can do more, how we can go further, how can we ensure that we're capturing all children and delivering for them.
Just to be clear, this is not it. There is more to come. It is still, to use the Prime Minister's words, it is still your policy that no child should be left behind.
Absolutely. This is very much about the next step in terms of a government's education recovery plan.
Well, then you're going to have to do a damn sight better persuading the Treasury than you've done so far, aren't you? Because you know that there was a plan you were discussing in the Treasury for £10 billion. You were doing it, we're told, just a few days ago, and you've come here with a tenth of that, with £1 billion. So you're going to have to, in the words of the school report, try much harder.
Well, Nick, I've always, maybe this has been a Yorkshireman, but I always thought £1.4 billion was a pretty hefty amount. But I do recognise that this is part of a process. This is part of our plan in terms of delivery. And
let's just do you've done your maths at school. What does it work out at then, your £1.4 billion per pupil in English schools? Do you know?
Well, Nick, you know as well as I do, this goes on top of the additional £700 million worth of funding.
It's not meant to be a trick question. What does it add up to?
Going on, but already been announced. So we're actually building on this. And there is an element of...
Let me give listeners the answer. It's £50 per pupil in English schools, this announcement. So I just put it to you again, the reason I assume that you were asking for 10 times this amount with the Chancellor just a few days ago is and you can tell us 50 quid a pupil ain't going to do it. It isn't nearly enough.
Well, Nick, you know very well, as I'm sure you've spoken about this many times, is quite unprecedented to be getting this quantum of money outside of a spending review. But what we decided that we needed to do is deliver interventions and support and invest in children immediately. That's why we've been, over the last few months, announced a total of over £3 billion of money going in terms of targeted help with children.
OK, but so you're still negotiating, that's clear. You're still, and you make it clear that you want more, £9 billion, it seems to me, what's happening behind the scenes. What, in principle, matters to you? Now, the man you appointed to be the Education Recovery Commissioner, a man called Sir Gavin Collins, he has argued for extra 100 hours of teaching for every child in English school, every child. Nothing like what you've announced today. As an aim, as an objective, is that broadly what you now want to look at?
So what we're also announcing today is a review of how we're best able to deliver the best outcomes for children as a result of time. I look at some of the highest performing schools that it's not just about extra academic time, it's also about extra enrichment time for children to be able to do more things in terms of a school day, whether that's sporting activities and whether that's the arts as well. And we've seen some schools now close, the school gates for pupils at sort of 2:45. I do question as to whether that is too early. And so
longer school day is still on the agenda.
It's very much on the very much on the agenda. That's why we've announced the review looking at this.
And what about shorter summer holidays? Is that still on the agenda?
Well, we wouldn't sort of be looking at actually taking an amount of time away from holidays, but we have been looking or have looked at the structure of a school year. At the moment, that's not something that we're progressing. The key focus that we want to do is to how the structure of the day best serves pupils.
OK, and if I may just do a little arithmetic class for us both here. If you want to help all children and not some, if you want more teaching time than they currently get, that means a lot more money, doesn't it, Secretary of State? A lot more money.
Well, what we're seeing is a number of schools who...
Is that a yes or a no? I'm not clear.
Nick, we see a number of schools who are actually able to deliver quite a substantially different type of day and a sort of a longer day.
Look, I'm not trying a trick question again. Your own appointee, the Education Recovery Commissioner, on the headed note paper of your department has said more will be needed. I suppose let me make it easier for you. Do you agree more will be needed?
We're very much looking at what additional interventions and what more needs to be done. We've been clear about that's all the way. It's very much part of a recovery plan. There have been lots of steps in this. As I say, £1.7 billion before this, 1.4 billion today. I have no doubt that in order to be able to deliver everything that we have ambitions for our children, there will be more that is required.
More that is required. Now, the Defence Secretary managed to get £16.5 billion out of the Treasury for 4 years. I mean, you're a competitive man. Presumably that sort of figure, which is the sort of figure, a little bit more than the Education Commissioner was talking about, that's the sort of figure you need, isn't it?
Well, I'd managed to get £14.4 billion out of the Treasury just sort of not too long ago. And on top of the £1.7 billion plus this £1.4 billion. So I'm always like a bit of friendly competition. But Ben's done incredibly well for our defence and we're doing incredibly well for our children. That's where the focus is going to be, but we're constantly looking at what additional interventions we're delivering in terms of the tutoring. This is going to have a direct impact on children straight away. We're delivering already in terms of teacher quality. We all remember those days, I mean, admittedly a long time ago for me and probably not so long ago for you, Nick, but those amazing teachers that had such an impact in terms of our lives and how we continue to ratchet up teacher quality. But we are continuing to look at the time element as well.
The reason I push you on these questions is because you'll know you've had a fair few critics during this pandemic. The Public Accounts Committee, all party, recently said that your department had, quotes, no plan for the challenges of COVID-19. It said your department shows little energy and determination to ensure that its catch-up offer is sufficient. What I think people are asking today is Gavin Williamson the man to deliver what the catch-up Tzar says is needed, or is he already lost?
Well, Nick, my focus has been on making sure children were back in school at the earliest possible moment. That's what we delivered on. The next focus has been running through all of this, is how we ensure children are able to catch up on what they've lost. And we've been delivering that in spades by rolling out new initiatives that have never been tried before. There's delivering results. And when you speak to children in schools, you're seeing the impact on them. That's why we've had this massive expansion of this.
I'm the man to get the money. You seem to be saying. Gavin Williamson, Education Secretary. I'm sorry, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks very much indeed for joining us.
That's nearly all from us. Our editors today were Richard Crook and Serene Baines, and the studio director was Ben Andrews. After the news, Tim Harford will be looking at numbers in More or Less. Have a good day.
BBC News at 9 o'clock. The Education Secretary Gavin Williamson has dismissed suggestions that catch-up funding of £1.4 billion for children in England is an attempt to address the pandemic's learning deficit on the cheap. The Department for Education says most of the money will go towards tutoring courses for disadvantaged pupils. But the BBC has learned that a package of more than £10 billion was rejected by the Treasury. Teaching unions say they're hugely disappointed. But Mr Williamson said the money was part of a process of recovery and it was vital that some funds were made available immediately.
This is only part of a process. We've announced 2 previous packages. And as we look forward to the spending review, there's a real sense about how we can do more, how we can go further. Maybe this has been a Yorkshireman, but I always thought £1.4 billion was a pretty hefty amount. But I do recognise that this is part of our plan in terms of delivery.